Now we're going to work on block B7C3F8 and G4. So here's a look at our completed block, and it's got section 3 and 4 that we previously pieced in the corner. And the fabrics we will use will be fabric 1, a triangle of that, fabric 4. We'll use little scraps of fabric 5 and a strip of fabric 6. And this is our optional pieced backing, and I'm going to use that. And also I'm going to use our optional wool. The threads we will use will be our thread A with a bobbin, our thread B with a bobbin, our thread E with a bobbin, thread F with a bobbin, our accent thread with a bobbin, and we'll also use our water soluble. So let's get started with step 1. So I've gone ahead and stitched step 1 of this block, and it's to put water soluble thread in your needle, and it will stitch a placement stitch. At that point you can put, for step 2, you can do your optional wool batting. If you're not going to do wool batting, just skip this step, and that wool batting will be placed exactly within that placement stitch, and continue with the water soluble thread to tack down the wool batting. Step 3, continue with the water soluble thread, and the machine will stitch a placement stitch. You want to keep ahead of your wool to make sure your foot doesn't get caught in the batting. Step 4, we will take our triangle of fabric 1 and we'll place it in the upper left corner. So we want to be sure that we have at least 1/4 inch extending past this particular basting line right here. So I'll make sure that's in the right place. I'll continue with my water soluble thread, and the machine will tack down fabric 1. So I just completed step 4 with the water soluble thread. Now I need to trim off this little bottom triangle, and I'll leave about a scant 1/4 inch. And for step 5, we'll take fabric 6 and we'll place it right side to fabric 1. We're going to change our thread out to a neutral thread in the needle, and we're going to stitch the seam. So for step 6, we will flip this fabric right side up, smooth it out nice and flat. We'll continue with the same thread, and we will tack down this section. So after that stitch, we can go ahead and trim this scant 1/4 inch on the inside of the block, and I'll leave that excess right there. So now we're ready for step 7, and step 7 is where we take our little scrap of fabric 5. We'll place it right side to fabric 6, keeping with the same neutral thread, and we'll stitch the seam. So for step 8, we will flip this fabric right side up, smooth it out. We're going to change to our water soluble thread in the needle and let the machine tack this down. So once this is tacked down, we can go ahead and trim it to a scant 1/4 inch within the block. I will leave this excess right here. And now we're ready for step 9. In step 9, we will take our strip of fabric 4 and place it right side to this piece section, raw edges even, and we'll change out to our neutral thread in the needle and stitch the seam. So once our seam is stitched, we'll flip our fabric right side up, and now we're on to step 10. We're going to change back to a water soluble thread in the needle and let the machine tack down fabric 4. So once that section is tacked down, I went ahead and trimmed away the excess seam allowance and left about a scant 1/4 inch. Step 11 is where we're going to take our section 3 and 4 that we had previously made on the cutaway stabilizer, and the machine's going to stitch a small match point about right here. So we'll show you how that works to get this to line up exactly where we want it to go. So for our match points, if you remember when we did our piecing of our sections on the lightweight cutaway stabilizer, we had you use a neutral thread that had some color to it. So that's what this gray is, and that's our match point right there. So all I need to do, this is how it'll look when it's finished, is put this right sides together, and I'm going to lower my needle right where that gray stitching line is. Exactly where that is. So hopefully you can see that. And that's my match point. So once I get that positioned, I'll pick my needle up and go ahead and stitch it. And that was with water-soluble thread. So now that I've tacked down that little match point, for step 12, I will switch to my neutral thread and my needle, and I'll come back and stitch the seam. Step 12 is the seam, and I switch back to my neutral thread, and what you need to do is lower your needle and position the needle drop right where your basting line is from your section. So now that I have that placed correctly, we can go ahead and stitch that seam. And I do like to slow my machine down for this step. And when it gets to my match point, I stop it, and you can just turn back your piece a little bit and just make sure it's lined up nice and straight. If you sew slowly, you can make sure your stitching line lines up with your basting line on your section. So there you go. There's your section 3 and 4 attached to your block. For step 13, I put water-soluble thread back in my needle, and I'm going to let the machine tack down this corner. Step 14, I went ahead and I put thread E in my needle only, and I stitched the hunter star in the corner. Now we're to step 15, which is to place the back. So I will turn my hoop over, and if you're going to do your pieced back, you want to refer to your directions. So you can see, according to my diagram, I need to have my fabric 2 in the upper right hand corner and my blue in the lower left corner. So that's how we'll place it. And because I've used a gray as my seam, I can see a little bit of gray stitching on my battleizer, and that's what I'm going to use to line up my seam line of my half square triangle. So I'll line that up, and I've got a little spray on the back of this so it stays where I put it. So I'll line it up at both diagonal corners, smooth it out, and turn it over and stitch it down with my water-soluble thread in the needle. So next you'll want to stitch step 16, which is this outline stitch around your hunter star, and you're going to put thread B in the needle and the bobbin. For step 17, I went ahead and put the red A in the needle and the bobbin, and we stitched the feathers. So I just completed step 18, where I placed our accent thread in the needle and the bobbin, and it did the quilting right here on the edges of the block. And this is step 19, where I placed thread F in the needle and the bobbin, and I stitched the decorative square. The last step in this block is step 20, and we will place thread E in the needle and the bobbin, and I've already stitched it, and it will stitch these two little decorative squares right here.